Pleasure to meet you, boys. You did a hell of a job.
Thank you, Agent Zoil.
Please call me Lorenzo. But I see you got yourself a plan B, huh?
Did I ever? These are my friends.
Hello.
Pleasure to meet you, boys. You did a hell of a job.
Thank you, Agent Zoil.
Please call me Lorenzo.
Lorenzo's oil.
That's right.
Buongiorno, listening people.
Dzień dobry.
Wow, how are you doing, Bartek?
I'm doing pretty well, and you're Ryan.
I am Ryan. I'm flying Ryan on this particular podcast.
Hey, you're not a lion, Ryan?
I'm not a lion, Ryan. I'm always a truthin' to you, buddy old pal. Here's a truth. We are both spitting young gentlemen who happen to be Polish. You ever think about that?
A lot.
How often?
I feel like every time we do an episode, it crosses my mind for some reason.
I don't know why. I don't know why it would cross your mind. It's just in your DNA. The DNA.
It is really funny, though. Like, we spit and then just coincidentally, completely separate from that, we're Polish.
Yeah, we both happen to be Polish.
Yeah, just sometimes I feel like we're not, but then I remember we are.
We are.
We spit.
And we spit. Hard truths, because here on the podcast we talk about movies. And today we're talking about a movie that has come recommended, because this is Pictures Powwow, where we sit down and powwow about some pictures, moving ones, in fact, pictures that move in front of our eyes.
Moving pictures.
And the recommendation this week was from you, the listening people, because we like to have a certain mode where we go through these films. So instead of just being whatever comes up, whatever we feel, we go, okay, how about we just have 1 week it's the listening people, the week after that it is Bartek's recommendation, and the week after that it is mine, and then we circle back around, because we get a lot of diversity that way. We get a lot of different things happening. And this time is a recommendation from one of our good friends and a fellow podcaster, John, who is the host of the Dirty Harry Minute podcast, where they broke down Dirty Harry minute by minute. We were on a couple of episodes of that. That was a fun time.
Yeah.
And John's recommended movies to us before, but today was one in particular. What film was lobbied to us? What film did John say, you know what, you got to do this?
Yep, so John asked us if we had done Lorenzo's Oil before, and I said, no, we haven't. I'll put it on the list. And now we've gotten around to doing Lorenzo's Oil from 1992. That's this episode.
John does not usually pick movies like this. Usually they're ones where it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense for someone who's a fan of Dirty Harry, say, or
Tommy
like,
Tricker and the Stamp
Yeah,
Traveler.
exactly. He actually chooses a lot of like kidsy movies. I wonder if it's because he himself is a family man.
No, I remember a couple of months after we did the Tommy Tricker and the Stamp Traveler episode, we went to a barbecue that was at his place that he was hosting, and we met one of his other friends there. And John stopped him and said, hey, what's this from? And he said a line from Tommy Tricker, and his friend had to think for a second. John, it's Tommy Tricker, and they did a podcast on it.
Yep. And
he was very happy about that.
There was a lot of excitement about the Tommy Tricker episode, one of our greatest. But today we're here to talk about a film that also involves a child. But boy, is this
this child doesn't have quite the same adventure as Tommy Tricker and
they go through something.
The actual main character of that film.
No, they go through a lot. Lorenzo's Oil is a film based upon true events. Obviously, there are some things that are changed for the sake of film and narrative, and I'm sure we may bring up some of those. But Lorenzo's Oil is a story about two parents having to struggle with the fact that their child, Lorenzo, has succumbed to some fairly new illness, or fairly newly discovered, newly realized.
Very rare is the thing.
Very rare illness. Was it ALD?
Yes.
Which will slowly strip him away of his mobility and personhood. And they have to deal with the red tape of bureaucracy and ethics and the medical field, as well as, really come to terms with how much of their child still remains in this body that they're looking after? Is Lorenzo still there if he has no sight or hearing or speech? And
It
brain stuff is just, dwindling and dwindling. Like, it is the case of if you have someone you love and they are, by all intents and purposes, a vegetable, are they still that person?
It basically touches upon everything that you can from the scientific side, research and the future of how we think about these diseases, and the personal parenthood side where my child is suffering now, please fix this.
So, people, if you have not seen Lorenzo's Oil, we recommend you give it a watch. We're going to get into it now, fully into all of it, or the best we can. So, I have not seen Lorenzo's Oil before this podcast. It's one of the few George Miller films I have not seen. George Miller, yes, directed this. We've talked about this last time on the podcast. George Miller is someone we've also covered a fair amount of his films on this podcast, or films that he's been related to in some way.
5 or 6 at this point now.
And this is the only film of his that is not fantastical. There is no fantastical elements to it. There is no supernatural. There is none of that. It does not devolve into anything. This is grounded in the real world. This is based on a real life story. There is none of his usual tendencies in that way. There are other ways that it shows its head, but George Miller's a really interesting filmmaker because the Mad Max films are great. We love them, but you kind of take for granted like what an interesting career as a filmmaker he's had. When we talked about the first Mad Max, and just like that film is rough around the edges. They're filming at random locations. They don't always have permits for things, like that real low-budget guerrilla filmmaking. And then to see him go to the Hollywood system and still have that kind of weird flair to him, and that just those interests in certain things. And with Lorenzo's Oil, his background as, in medicine, because he was a doctor at one period of time, or at least he had a medical expertise, it really does show up in this film. You can see like there's a certain delicacy, but also certain passion and interest in what this film is grappling with when it comes to all of the dramas that you can see within the medical field and how it affects those that inside of it and outside of it.
Yeah.
So, it's really cool.
Yeah, I really liked how in this film, I mentioned the two sides, like the personal parenthood side and the science side. It actually made a really good case for both sides. It didn't feel like, the parents are the only ones that we're meant to, support. These science people are awful. How dare they be, tied up in all this?
So what is your history with Lorenzo's Oil? Had you seen this? Do you know much about this? Have you heard of this true story before?
I don't think so at all. I think, I until the end of the film where it told us, what's happening now, I actually didn't know it was based on a real story. I was kind of going through it thinking about like narrative possibilities, like, oh, well, obviously he's going to die at the end and there's going to be some sort of thing to it. But then it told me like, oh, no, this is what's currently happening. Like, oh, whoops, that was a bit insensitive of me.
Currently, as in when the film came out, obviously more has happened since then.
Yeah.
But, and it's interesting, too, because they bring in some of the real-life people involved, such as the British biochemist who makes the said oil played himself.
Oh, yeah, there was someone who played themselves.
Yep, that was him. And there was one or two other people, like Adoni's receptionist, or there was someone's receptionist played a small walk-in role in this. There's like one or two people of this story who do make appearances as either themselves or just people within the narrative.
That's really cool.
Which is cool. Which is really cool. That's like a neat detail. But this is a hard film. This is a very depressing movie. Even if you didn't realize until the end that it's based on a true story, this is a film that is very confronting.
Yeah, I remember when I told you, like, okay, John's recommended this film, you made some sort of comment that indicated to me, like, oh, this is like a rough film.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when I was looking up, a copy of this film, I was seeing like stray reviews that were saying like, this is just 2 hours of watching someone suffer. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a heavy film. And I didn't realize it was 2 hours until I started.
2.25 hours. It's a long one.
Mm.
To talk about something a bit on the light side first, the film obviously is dealing with the suffering of a child, but the most hilarious aspect is the poster. Have you seen what the poster is of this film? It is a poster of them looking happy.
Oh, yeah, I have seen it.
It is the most deceptive, evil poster ever created.
This one?
Yeah. Look at it. It is. Think about the movie you just watched and think about how that film's poster leads you not to the movie you just watched. It's brilliant. I think the poster is great because it does actually reflect in the film. It is
Nick Nolte
imagery.
Looks like he's in another world a little bit.
Yeah, but the film shows a happy, smiling child and Susan Sarandon, and it's them in bed.
The mum and child are having a great time.
And it just looks like it's going to be a good old time. You'd watch this with your parents on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
Oh,
it looks like a sort of like feel-good award bait kind of thing.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that. But talking of George Miller, what did you feel about this in terms of that lens of just thinking about who this filmmaker is and how this is very much off the beaten path of what we have seen him do in his career?
I didn't really have him in mind while watching it, but when I read the trivia point about how, or just the fact that he is a qualified doctor or has a background in it, that really kind of shed light on, why the film was the way it was, like the way it did deal with a lot of the scientific, the medical side of things. I really thought that aspect came through really well. There was one point where they were explaining, I forget who was explaining it, but the whole thing about carriers and, not having it sometime 50-50 chance. I remember when I was in my first high school, 7 to 10 school, there was some, and I heard about this all the time during those years, and I can't believe the names of the diseases left my head, but we kept hearing about this one disease constantly. It was a disease that, like, someone associated to the school suffered with, and we would have every year like a day dedicated to like raising funds for that research. And I remember there was one assembly where they explained how the disease works, and it was the disease itself not very similar to the one in this film, but like the whole process about like you have a 50% chance of being a carrier, slight chance of like having it yourself, 50% chance of not carrying it at all, and the explanation of this film was like identical to that, and that was something that always stuck with me. So I could tell from that this was based on a real thing. At first, I didn't quite know what ALD was. I probably have heard of it before, but that explanation showed me like, oh, this is real.
So, yes, there's a lot of those technical expertise in there, a lot of those specifics, the language, even some of the iconography. You can definitely tell, like, even if this filmmaker or the team behind it don't have a background in it, they've definitely committed to understanding this stuff, because it's a story about people who don't understand this stuff and they dedicate themselves to understand it. So we are brought into that thinking as well, because the two lead characters have to put themselves into this medical world and they question, why do things work this way, and why are we thinking about this, and why aren't we looking at this, and this. But George Miller, he has just from a visual standpoint, the way he constructs scenes, the way the camera is shot, people talk about this very much so with these newer Mad Max films, but he definitely is someone where he's grown disinterested in dialogue. Like, he's very much about the visual language. Max in the Mad Max movies barely talks. And there's lots of stretches of this movie where that's very prevalent, where it's almost operatic of what is being portrayed, like Nick Nolte falling down the stairs crying, and there's just this onslaught, or when they're at the church and Susan Sarandon is praying, and there's so much of that there. But to me, what really stuck out is he has and this must come from his background too, he has such a fascination with the human body, and that it's this like almost like this horrific prison that you were trapped in, and like you rely on it for everything, and then if something fucks up, you are just you're screwed. And I don't say this as a joke, I don't say this lightly, but so much of this movie, that is a grounded human drama about a family being torn apart because their son has this horrific illness. It was like that scene in the first Mad Max. So much of this movie made me think of Goose in the first Mad Max, when Goose is a character who meets a horrific fate and he gets burnt up, and Max goes to visit him in the hospital, and you get all of this, like, it just weighs on you. It's like this horrific...
Goose was his friend,
Yeah,
right?
the one with the super blonde hair. He was like the cool character who gets fucked up by the guy.
Yeah.
And he goes to visit him in hospital, and you just hear his breathing, hear all of the machines, and Max just like looks at him, he's wrapped up in bandages, and Max looks underneath, and we don't see it, but we see Max's reaction and it freaks him the fuck out. Like that intensity, because obviously George Miller, through his life previously, had to deal with people who had like roadside accidents, and he would obviously have seen horrible shit. This movie made me think of that, but like 2 and a bit hours. It's just like this oppressive, like, oh my God, this is just, how do you keep going with that? And we actually do see that a lot in his movies, like just this fascination with, like, you know, the human body, like with the Mad Max films, with them, like, you know, the mutations and the disfigurements, and like how people will adapt to that, and how people will still live and progress and keep going, even when you question, like, what is life itself if you are stripped away of all of those things that, you know, you would consider to keep you alive.
Yeah, I was going to point out that you always reminded me of the trivia point that, like, Max's injuries are all, like, permanent, or, like, there's signs of them even going forward.
Yeah, there's continuity of those. The few things that get continuity in the Mad Max movies is his injuries.
That's an interesting observation, though, the body consistency.
Yeah, it's because, like, even in Witches of Eastwick, because this, you know, comes off shortly after that, where Susan Sarandon was in that, there was like this fascination with like sickness and illness. There was like the woman in town who gets fucked over by Jack Nicholson, and she starts like spewing up like all of the cherries and all that, and she starts to, like, her body starts to wither away, and like Richard Jenkins is like, is she even my wife anymore if she's been robbed of all of her senses and all of these things? And then you watch this movie, and it doesn't have any of those wacky hijinks of Satan or post-apocalypse. This is a true story. And you're like, you know what? It may sound a bit crazy at first that George Miller is interested in doing this, but then when you actually think about all of the things he's done, it makes a lot of sense. It's like, yeah, he is... He's just got something about, you know, his life and his, you know, artistic voice just makes him come back to some of these ideas and themes. So the idea of just like one that actually is the most directly vocal about this conflict is like, of course George Miller wants to do that.
You know, I was about to make a joke about, you know, saying like, oh, where's the Babe influence in this? But wasn't there a disabled dog in that film?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there it is. That's it.
Maybe we have to do Babe 2, Pig in the City, to really see that connection, because that's the one he did direct fully.
Yeah, well, I need to see that, and I need to see both Happy Feet, because I haven't seen either.
I've only seen the first one, and it's been too long to recall the details of Happy Feet. But did you like this film overall? I mean, I know maybe a hard question to say because the film is so... depressing.
No, it reminds me of the thing we kept saying during the Nightingale. It's like, I liked it for, you know, in the way that I appreciated it. No, but I did like this film. This was very dramatic and very, very, it felt authentic. It felt like it was making a point, and the performances were really good. Like, at first, you know, I hear Nick Nolte, he's doing this Italian accent, and I recall seeing 48 Hours Forever ago. I was like, he did not have that accent in that. And at first it did take me a while to get into it, but as the film went on and like he was playing it so sincerely, like it stopped being a, you know, sort of sticking point for me, and I actually kind of believed in it.
You acclimatized to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked the movie as well. I appreciated it. I actually kind of was drawn to it because it made me think of segments in other films that I really liked. I've mentioned it before, but one of my favorite things about The Exorcist is how the mother approaches the situation in a very rational way, and she does everything that a normal human being would do before going to the priests to think that her child's possessed by a demon. She goes through all the doctors and all of that, and you see like these horrific, nightmarish, just repellent images of just normal medicine, like all of these procedures to try and figure out what's wrong with Reagan. And that's this movie. Like that segment, those moments of The Exorcist, that's this movie where we just keep coming back to here's this experiment, here's this treatment, here's this thing. Is it working? God, no, but we have to wait because the trial's still running and we don't know if it could work later, and your kid could just be 1 in a million that doesn't work for it. And so you just have to sit there knowing that this pain that's being inflicted upon them because of our medical trials and tribulations just has to happen.
Yeah,
sorry.
That is so much of this film. Yeah, it's like we know it's not immediately doing anything, but that's how the science works. Like there's that speech at the ALD family committee thing where they're trying to explain, like, well, we need like a control group. We can't have them have this bias. We need to do it this way for the sake of the future. And we eventually get a line in one of my favorite scenes with the main doctor that they're working with.
Yeah.
Where Susan Sarandon, chews him out. And it's like, how dare you say that to me? Where
Professor Nicolaius, yeah.
Yes, him. Where he lays it out, straight up that, you are fighting for the life of your one child here. I am fighting for, all of the boys who will have this in the future.
Yeah, and the film isn't afraid to make the situation itself and the characters within it hard to relate to, or not maybe hard to relate to, but you feel the ambiguity of the situation because you want to side with these parents. Of course you do. You feel for them and you're brought in with them on this journey, and you can see the frustrations of having to deal with the slow, agonizing process that is, the medical field. They just want to save their kid. They just want to do these things. They think they have these ideas because they read some articles. But then, you flip it around as the film does, and you're like, you guys aren't medical professionals. Like, you've studied, sure, we commend you for that. You've brought this stuff here, but, like, this could fuck up his liver. Have you thought about that? Like, what happens if it goes wrong? What do you do then? Do you admit? No, you're going to say, well, that was worth the risk because it alleviated this. And that's the thing. Like, you spend so much time in the headspace because it is such a tragic situation, being sympathetic towards the parents. But the film isn't also afraid to show you, like, would you be as sympathetic towards them if you weren't with them? If you were the medical board, if you were other parents, and, like, how would you feel about, like, oh, these people are just coming up with their own remedies and saying, oh, it works. Because it works temporarily or momentarily, or it could work permanently on their child. But it's like, will that work overall?
Especially with Susan Sarandon, which, you made the comment about how the poster, she's the parent that's smiling there. So that tells us, she's the really outwardly emotional one.
No.
And
the poster's a lie, by the way. That poster's such a lie. She's the most void, closed off, like, she cares, but it's like she has to close off certain aspects of reality to keep going.
Yes, but she cares, but she has very deep love for her child, die for my child kind of energy. And you see how that passion, does drive her forward and does drive to some positive results. But then you also see the extremes of the negative side where she snaps at, all of the people that are helping her.
Her sister.
Her sister and the 2 nurses she's hired, who we get told by multiple different people, like, these are really good people at their job. The second nurse has a bit of problems that Susan Sarandon has with her, but, it's pointed out that, like, she does the job that she's meant to do really well, and you just kicked her out because you got pissed off at something she said because she was under a lot of stress. And you do feel that conflict of I am on your side, but I'm seeing you,
delude
yourself and make mistakes.
She's fanatical. And I don't say that lightly. The film does play with the fact that she's religious, strongly religious, and that her religious side does start to become a guiding principle for why everything she's doing is correct. Not to a cartoonish degree, but to a degree that feels realistic for the situation. Like, she starts to use Jesus and the Bible and all of that to help motivate Lorenzo and herself. But at the same time, she's cut off her family and her religious community to help her during all of this because she must suffer alone, which is often something you do see that happens with so many people, especially ones with this religious background too, where it's like, I must suffer alone through this.
There is a Catholic belief that suffering leads to salvation.
Yeah. And she, Susan Sarandon is one of those actresses that I like her a lot, but then when I watch a movie with her, I'm always reminded how excellent she truly is. I think for some reason she's an actress I never catalog enough as one of the greats until I watch her in a movie, and then I'm like, oh, Susan Sarandon's always excellent. Like, I'm never disappointed with Susan Sarandon. Like, this is a woman who has done pretty much all of it. Like, she's been very funny in things. She's played like these puritanical characters, these sexy characters. Like, she's really done so much throughout her career. She's very good at what she does. And you see this movie and it's a showcase for her. Like, Nick Nolte gets some great moments, of course, but this is really Susan Sarandon's movie. It's her movie to show off what she is good at. And it's those eyes and like her slender neck. Like, she reminds me of like a human swan. She just has like this very elegant way of moving, but there's like a certain stressed panic that's just below the surface.
You know what's weird is, and this might sound like I'm, comparing her to something unfavorable. She reminded me so much of the mum from Troll 2.
Mm-hmm.
Where in Troll 2, it's like it's weird that this character is acting like this when there isn't really much cause to. Mm-hmm. Whereas in this film, you see this character like devolve into the Troll 2 mum. So it actually feels kind of more, it makes more sense that she's like this.
Whenever I think of Susan Sarandon, I can't help but think of that amazing Family Guy jab that they did of her and Tim Robbins being together. And it's like Tim Robbins is annoying. And then it's like Susan Sarandon like doing like a little ad to help Ethiopian children or whatever it is. And it's like, she's like, hello, I'm Susan Sarandon and I always look tired. And it's just like, she really does always look kind of tired. It's just like, I have these eyes that look like I just need to close them for another 5 minutes to get rejuvenated. It's like,
There is a part in this film where she's told, like, you need to go get some sleep right now.
Please eat.
I could use some coffee, though.
But yeah, Susan Sarandon is just magnificent in this. Like, you hang on every moment. And the film becomes so much about how she is this oppressive character that when we cut over to people in literally different countries that have never met her, they fear her like wrath if they get in the way of what she needs to do for her son. Like, when they're actually getting the Lorenzo, the oil, because the film, we'll get to the oil stuff in a moment, but these two British guys that we've never met before are chatting, looking at the old British man who's like the real life guy. Mm. And they're talking about like, we should stop him. It's hurting him. He's feeling old. Like, yeah, but then you'd have to deal with Mrs. A, you have to deal with you have to deal with Susan Sarandon. It's like, oh, but then they're like, I won't do that. Like, they've never met her. Like, they've never physically met her, but they know, they've had to interact with her clearly, and she's fucking scary.
It's very odd that in this film, when they do something that's like meant to be funny, it is very funny.
It is, well, yeah. It is very funny.
I had one moment that I just burst out laughing.
Yeah?
It was when Nick Nolte was at the Institute researching and, like, he's very frantic and talking to that lady who's going to find him some stuff. And later on, he just very meekly apologizes and the woman's just like, oh, well, You're Italian. That really, I was not expecting a punchline there, so that really got me.
This is a film made up of a lot of character actors, some getting their break and some of them just doing their thing. The teacher at the very beginning, the blonde-haired teacher, she is that's Laura Linney, who's been in a bunch of things, but this is her theatrical debut. And it's like, oh, Laura Linney started here. But then you get like the other mother, who's
Jay Bird's mum.
Yeah, Jay Bird's mum, and that's beloved character actress Margot Martindale. And it's like, oh, Margot Martindale, where on the show BoJack Horseman, she's a recurring character playing herself, where the gag is Margot Martindale is like a diamond jewel thief, and it's like, but every time they introduce her, it's like beloved character actor Margot Martindale, and it's just her being crazy. But my favorite thing was Margot Martindale, she's playing such a her type role. Like she's just, she's got that small town charm.
I'm not super familiar with her, but she felt very appropriate in her role.
Yes. But then there's another actress, Ann Dowd is the actress's name, who is always the one. It's like, oh, if it's not Margot Martindale, it's Ann Dowd. Ann Dowd is in everything. Like she's like the one who's always like, if it's not Margot, it's Ann. And Ann Dowd is in this movie too as one of the nurses. And I did a moment where I was like, oh, that's Margot Martindale, because it was before Margot Martindale showed up. I was like, oh, Margot Martindale, there she is. And then it was like, then Margot Martindale showed up later in the movie. I was like, wait, no. Oh, that must have been, no, that can't have been Ann Dowd. And then I looked up, it's Ann Dowd.
So you saw Margot and you're like, oh, well, Ann can't be in this film then.
Yeah, exactly. It was such a funny thing, because I was like, oh, did they really have that starting at this point already? Yeah, it's been decades of these two just doing their thing of just like, oh, you thought this one was in this show. Actually, no, this one's in this one. It's like,
Schwarzenegger and Stallone in the same movie?
I'm sure if I showed you a picture of both of them and you're like, oh yeah, I can see what you mean. Like they just have that kind of homely charm to them. That kind of like, the feeling like they play characters from a small town type deal.
Yeah.
But and then there was the guy who's in charge of like the foundation, like that guy, the guy who phones him up to be like, I'm actually not a doctor, I'm actually another parent.
Yeah, I looked him up.
He was in a million things. Like he was just one of those.
He was in Rocky
guys.
And Bullwinkle.
Yes, he was, and he was just like, he was in an Independence Day. Like he was in a gajillion things, and he was always great. And I was like, hey, it's that guy. He usually plays sleazy guys. So
he looks like he would play sleazy.
Yeah, he has that kind of like rich boy face. And so when he showed up here and he literally has like greasy fingers, I was like, oh, okay, we're going to deal with it. And he was actually like a morally complex character that brought up the hard thing to hear, which is, him and his wife was like, have you considered like your child is no longer there and that it may be actually easier to not let them suffer anymore?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh.
He was another really good example of, this character is like antagonistic-ish towards our main characters, but they're making a really good point, and eventually, you're going to have the moment where you see like, oh, this character is definitely for real. Because he's the head of the whole committee of other parents that have had children that suffered this exact same disease, so he should be like super sympathetic, but he's working very closely with, the science doctor people who are researching this, and he's trying to get everyone to go along with this thing. And when that gets questioned, it's this awkward spot where the parenthood side is butting heads at them for being on the science side, even though they are a parent.
But there is the fair reasoning of like, it is not our job to raise false hopes for these parents, because that would then just destroy everything. Like we are in part a therapeutic group as well. So if we, without having, a professional approved thing, if we just raise up any little like cure-all thing that people come up with, then you're just going to lead to false hope, and then that brings further devastation. Like, yeah, we have been desperate enough when we had our kid go through this, our first kid go through this, where we would do the same thing as you, but then, you can't put desperate people in situations where they're willing to hope and do anything, because that just leads to further pain if it doesn't lead anywhere. Like, and what do you do? It's like, that's a really morally tough thing to grapple with, because it's like, this is kind of what I love about medical dramas in a weird way, is you have a bunch of characters all wanting to do the right thing. Everyone in this movie wants to do the right thing.
Absolutely. No one wants to kill kids in this film.
No, exactly. No one. And like, they even float like, all these doctors, like Professor, like the professor, are worried about their legacy and egos and their prestige. It's like, that's not it at all. Like, you never really get that sense from these characters. They all want to do the right thing, but because of their backgrounds, because of their perspectives, because of their situations, because of their context, what is the right thing means different things to them. But they're all working towards the same goal. Like, if it was up to us, we would cure these children. but like, what is your responsibility within that?
Yeah, the
It's
closest
different for everyone.
Yeah, the closest the film comes to like, oh, got you there is when the guy's like, where Susan Sarandon asks one of the guys in one of the meetings, like, oh, have you tried asking these people for money? It's like, they would never approve this. And she's like, so you haven't even asked.
Yeah. That was one of those moments. But yeah, this is a good movie. So Nick Nolte.
Mhm.
How familiar are you with Nick Nolte? You said 48 Hours.
I've seen 48 Hours, and I feel like I've seen some other things that he's been in, but not too many.
Yeah, he's an interesting actor. He's an actor where his voice over time is one of those guys where you can't understand a thing he says because he's really gruff and grumbly.
Yeah, I seem to recall in 48 Hours, like, his voice being very deep and gruff was a big thing, and, you know, didn't have it in my head, like, exactly what he sounds like normally. So seeing, you know, this 2 hours and 15-minute film where he's doing this accent started making me question, like, do I know what his voice actually sounds like?
But he is a good actor. He's been in a million things. He did the Cape Fear remake with Robert De Niro, where he was the lead guy in that. Like, he's done quite a lot. And at this period of his career, he was taking a lot of big swings. Like, he was working with, like, acclaimed directors, but he was doing their movies that are kind of like this, where they're, like, not their most well-known movies, but kind of good movies still. Like, there's still ones that get a level of acclaim, but not their best movies. But they were, like, weird performances from Nick Nolte. Like, Nick Nolte, you know, he could just be handsome leading man, dramatic leading man guy, but then he would do, like, Lorenzo's Oil will be like, now he plays grief-stricken father who's an Italian guy and like this. Then he will do Cape Fear and it'll be like, here's the morally upright lawyer and who's getting chased down by Robert De Niro. And then he would do like some other movie where he's like a serial killer. And then he was just going all over the place. It was like this 6-year period where he was just choosing the most bizarre projects for a leading man. And you couldn't help but commend it and be impressed by it. But, I didn't care about, like, I didn't get affected by his accent at the beginning. I was like, okay, I'm watching it. This is what they're doing. It's fine. But I paused the movie because I got a phone call. It was only like for 15 minutes. But then I came back and it was like that thing of like, oh no, I now cannot get used to the accent again. Like,
you were dragged out of the film.
It was in the moment where it just started. The scene hadn't fully started, but when he was explaining like the enzymes and he had like all the paper clips. And at the library to the sister, and like
that was a pretty manic scene for him, yeah.
And I was like, this accent is a lot. Like it is. You wonder why they couldn't just get someone who's Italian, as someone who's not even like Italian speaker, but like actually Italian. Because Nick Nolte's not even Italian. Like he's got no Italian background to him, and once you think about that, you can really feel like, oh, there is no Italian stuff here.
What if it's pronounced Nolte?
Nolte. He would be great in Kangaroo Jack as one of the many fake Italians in that movie. Like him and Christopher Walken. Oh my God. If Christopher Walken was in this as the dad, that would be marvelous. And he used his voice in Kangaroo Jack where he's learning about different words in the thesaurus.
Was he in Kangaroo Jack?
Yeah, wasn't that Christopher Walken was the head of the gang in Kangaroo Jack? Am I not right? Yes, he was, because then he voiced the kangaroo threatening them. Christopher Walken was the head of the crime.
That.
Yeah, and his whole thing was he was a gangster who was trying to use random words that he picked up in the dictionary to sound eloquent.
That sounds
And he
familiar.
sent his son, Michael Shannon, to go down there to go kill them. But it was this elaborate thing where he sent them down to Australia because he thought it would be a really nice thing to do before they died. It was like, before you died, wouldn't you like to go see Australia? That would be I've always wanted to go. Like, Christopher Walken was like a mustachio gangster in like 2 scenes of that movie, and they reused some of his dialogue for when the kangaroo talk, because he talked with Christopher Walken doing his Italiano voice. So yeah, Christopher Walken appeared in Kangaroo Jack, and I can't believe that you forgot that.
I do not remember that.
You loved him in Kangaroo Jack.
I'm sure I did, but
and his whole thing about how he was trying to use all of these fancy words casually in conversation because he was like his word of the day stuff. How could you forget? You know what?
It's going to be on my mind the rest of
We're
this
going to rewatch
now.
Kangaroo Jack right after this, everyone.
The third ever film we did for the podcast.
That's right. That's right. And you were still understanding what the title of our show was. That was
that episode, yeah.
Where you were correcting me of if
It's underappreciated masterpieces.
and I'm like, no, it isn't.
And I remember you got really concerned, like, is it not a word?
Yeah, because you do that to me sometimes. Like, that's not a word. I'm like, oh, is
Yeah,
it
that was
not?
back in the Culklin era.
That was back in the Coldplay era. What else do you want to say about Lorenzo's oil, Bartek? The child didn't act in anything else, by the way. I just want to
Yeah,
let you know that.
he became a journalist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? After you do Lorenzo's oil, I think you can just hang up your hat and say
One
no
and
more.
done,
No
yeah.
more for me.
No, I meant the kid was good too.
Yeah, he was.
The opening was really charming when he was in Africa,
Mhm.
seeing all the warm people. It was reminding me of the Polish film we did
I knew you were going to say it.
in Desert and Wilderness.
Are you going to bring up the Polish bit of the movie?
Yeah, thank you, Lorenzo Zorro, for having a Polish bit. One of the key articles that they found that inspired them to it led them to the oil was written by a Polish person.
Because they were studying rats.
Yeah, they were studying something separate, but it was relevant.
So the film, obviously, Lorenzo's Oil, is about the treatment for ALD that the family discovers because of all of this research and stuff, where basically at the start of it was like they needed to get a pure extract of olive oil to try and bring down to try and help even out the fats in his brain, because that's the thing, isn't it? Like, it's about how the fat
there's
imbalances.
the sink thing. It's like when you eat, you gain certain amounts of fats, but the body also produces an amount of fats, and it was like an imbalance was happening, and they had to find some way of getting that. Oh, because you lose the fat because it goes down a certain artery, but it was getting clogged up.
And it starts to erode what's it called? Myelin?
Myelin, I think.
Myelin, which is a thing in your brain that basically the film explains, once that starts to go, you are kind of fucked in terms of being able to have proper control of your body and your mind. And
we should say, even though we're kind of on the right track explaining it here in the episode, the film actually explains it pretty well.
Yes, it does. But again, as said, the film explains it in an increasing way because the film is from the POV of characters who don't know anything about this to them becoming experts in it. And we, as the audience, feel like we are becoming more experts in it as the film is. Like, when it gets to the point where it's like, olive oil only gets it to a certain percentage. We need to try, was it grapeseed oil? Was that it?
I think it was rapeseed, wasn't it?
Was it? Yes.
I think so.
We're like, yeah, of course. Yeah, give that a try. And it's like the medical professional's like, no, we can't do that. We've never tested it on humans. It's like, well, what about all of Asia who've been doing it for thousands of years? And it's like, well, that's different. It's like, is it that different? And then the big line of like, hey, you can't tell me what oil I put on my kid's salad. It's like, nice. And Lorenzo's Oil, as depicted in the film and as known at the time, was kind of seen as like a very big breakthrough for ALD. Like, it helped kind of lessen a lot of the problems. Obviously, Lorenzo is not cured of this because he had lost a lot of what was it called again? The myelin.
Yeah.
And so then their next effort was to try and restore that, or see if we can do that. And the most important thing to mention is the film gets to this point where they acknowledge, like, look, Lorenzo has reached beyond a point where we won't be able to bring him back to the kid he was. And they ask Susan Sarandon, like, is this all happening so that you could stop this from happening to another kid in the future? And it's like this very bitter pill for her to swallow to admit that yes. And that's kind of where the film kind of really is getting at. Like, this story of Lorenzo is about these people who have done all of this stuff in order to help their kid, but really, in the end, they're doing it for future generations of people. And the film ends with like all of these testimonials of all of these children and even grown men who are saying like, hey, I did Lorenzo's Oil and it helped lessen the symptoms or helped me or did all of this stuff. And it is this heartwarming thing of like the movie is like, look, this couple, this family are still having to endure this. They're still having to get these little victories of like their son's mobility coming back in this way, or the acknowledgement like his mind is still there, like he can recognize things that are happening. He's getting his sight back, hearing, all of that. But he's going to be stuck with all of these problems. But what they've done is to help future generations, and they've actually made huge breakthroughs in studying this illness that was basically not really looked into as heavily until their involvement.
It was rare.
It was rare, and all of the experts were working separately with one another. They were all in their own worlds doing little strands of it.
And at the very least, they beat the time span that they were told at the beginning, because it's like, 2 years, like it's going to be 24 months of degradation and then they will die. And the point the film ends, like it's like 3 years after that and he's still fine. And, taking away from, the context of the film, he lived until 2008, so
he
2
lived
decades.
to be 30.
Yeah. He died on my 15th birthday.
Mm-hmm. And his father died 7 years before then from lung cancer.
I thought it was the mum.
No, it was the dad.
Oh, it was the dad.
Dad. And the film shows that, or kind of flags that up because he smokes all the time in the movie and he died of lung cancer.
Well, there's that shot of all the cigarette butts on the ground.
That was a great shot.
Yeah.
That was an awesome shot. That was one of my favorite shots.
Tells you a lot.
So the thing about Lorenzo's oil, like the actual substance of it, is like, now Lorenzo's oil is still important, but it is more of like it just prolongs the effects. Like it isn't a cure. It just, makes it so like, if you catch this early, you use this, it will stave off these symptoms for a longer period of time, but you most likely, not always, but you most likely will still get ALD at some point in the future. But it is not like how the film kind of portrays it at the end, where it's like, well, if you use it early, you're going to be just fine. From what I've read and from what people have talked about when it comes to what we know more about the film, it's like it's still very important. It's still something used. It's still of worth, but it isn't as clean as the kind of film wraps it up to be, which is... And the film even knows that. Like, the film is, like, giving all this text at the end that's kind of like, this is where we are now. This is where things are now. And this is what they're going to try and work on next. And think about that. Because, how is the film... Like, the film is relatively fresh after everything that they in real life were going through. So...
Yeah, I think the Where Are They Now thing was pretty recent to where the film came out.
So is there anything else you want to flag up, mention about Lorenzo's oil?
Not a very big thing, but I remembered while we were talking that there's an early point in the film. It's when Lorenzo is still, able to function, where it was like a montage sequence, but it didn't feel like a montage. It was like very short, rapid scenes. Felt kind of odd.
In what sense? Like, describe more so what you're talking about.
So it was, I guess it was the montage of, seeing weird behaviors pop up for Lorenzo. And it felt like the scene would start, you'd get a little bit to establish the point of, what's happening with Lorenzo, and then the scene would end really quickly. And it felt like a couple of those happened in a row. And it did feel kind of odd. It was weird kind of filmmaking. It didn't really... It wasn't a thing that kept up in the film, but I remembered it was a thing that happened, and yeah, it felt a bit odd.
Yeah, it's a film where I can't think of too many big issues I had with it. Like Nick Nolte's accent is something where I don't love it, but his performance is still good. It's one of those situations. They invite this man from Africa that they knew, and that was established at the beginning of the movie to help
Omori, I think.
To help be of aid to Lorenzo. And it's a very touching scene when the guy comes to the house and it's very silent, and then
where he sings.
It's very nice, but that character is not a character. He's just like the magical black man that enters the movie to make people feel good.
He's established like right at the beginning, like makes a
Yes.
knife for Lorenzo, and even when he's in Africa and Lorenzo has like a relationship with all of these different people, like this character is kind of singled out as like, oh, he's the main one that he's got a
But
relationship
he's not a
with.
real person in the movie. That is like I don't know if it's based on a real guy, but like in terms of like what the movie is, he's just like this magical entity that comes in to make it like things feel good now. And he doesn't really get much to do. And they even raise things like, okay, they raise things that are probably like fair to raise, but the film doesn't actually bother with them. So why did it raise it? Like, oh, you really think we're going to allow this? Like, could you imagine the debacle that happened when we invite an African man without their full like papers and is Muslim too in this racist country? And they raise all of that, which is fair enough, but then none of it matters. It just is like, well, you got to raise it because those things are there, but it's like, I don't know. It's just one of those things. It's like that character. It's like I don't mind that scene. Like when he first enters, I don't mind him at all. But I was kind of hoping that he, like with all those nurses, the nurses got more characterization to them, and he just feels like this, like just wholly weird magical thing that floats into the movie to make things feel good because Susan Sarandon knows him, and there's I don't know. It's just
No, I agree with you. Yeah, it felt like they were leading up to a point. Like when it's first brought up that like, oh, I sent him a letter inviting him over. You know, Nick Nolte has that whole speech and also brings up like he's not a medical professional. Like we're going to invite him all the way here to just do this. And he asks her like, you know, what did you say in the letter? And Susan Sarandon, you know, said what she wrote in the letter, which was like very emotionally charged.
but not specific.
And that led up to a conversation about, you know, like, how do you see our child? What do you want out of this whole thing? And, you know, there was ideas there, but then going back to the literal thing of like, we're inviting this guy to come to America to help look after Lorenzo and be a friend to him. Yeah, his presence is permanent throughout the rest of the film, but other than that scene where he first comes and sings for him, it's more just, you know, he's one of the carers around the house.
And obviously things are heightened and exaggerated and changed up from the real life situation. The couple don't seem like in real life they were this fraught in the way that the film is portraying. But I understand for narrative in a story like this, I understand that.
Yeah, you can even see the foreshadowing when they go to that committee meeting for the first time. They talk to all these different families. Some of them bring up things about like, oh, you know, we end up fighting, or like there's going to not be any sex for a long time.
The men are weak in situations like this.
Yeah, and you start to see little things. You start to see a lot of those things happen. Like there's the whole scene where they yell at each other, you know, just saying things like off the heat of the moment, things like that.
Yes, off the heat of the night.
Saying like your cursed blood or your dirty blood or something
yeah,
like that because
I don't
it's carried
know.
by the mum.
Yeah, that was a moment that I didn't believe. Out of all of the drama, that there was one of those where that to me felt like the Hollywood thing where it's like, oh, he has to say that because it would be a cruel thing to do. I don't, like, for some reason, out of all of the stuff, including Nick Nolte's silly accent, that was the thing in the whole entire movie. I just said that wasn't real. That's a Hollywood thing. It was just like a line too far. Like I just don't buy that character would do that, and not even in that moment. I just didn't believe it.
Especially with the context of like, oh, there was a little bit of foreshadowing earlier that there will be a fight. Yeah, and then there's also the thing of like that's the like there is tension between the two of them, like in the scene with where she sent the letter, but. Yeah, you don't really have another fight like that, and you don't really have a follow-up to that specific moment.
If you don't mind getting a bit personal here, I would like to know, you've had to, you know, even over the span of the almost 10 years we've been doing this podcast, you've had to deal with a lot of medical stuff over the years with your back and this and that, and the slow process of getting things figured out and things like that. Does that, you know, stuff kind of linger with you when you watch a movie like this? Like he's going through that process. Like your stuff wasn't obviously as dire as this, but like the whole rigmarole where you have to kind of rely on the you know the chain of events and the professionals and these things and just time passing, but you yourself are still suffering from medical stuff and hoping like this thing will hopefully solve it, but then maybe later on down the line you have to deal with it again, like with how you have with your back and things.
I think the fact that it wasn't life-threatening made it not as relevant, but there was an element of like, oh, you had to see all these different professionals have all these different procedures done and then have to wait for, the announcement of like when we can do the surgery.
Yeah, and being told you have to do these things to help alleviate said thing, but then a couple of years later, well, no, I have to do it again.
Yeah, it was literally 5 years later, which now I'm 6 years since the last surgery, so that hasn't happened again.
Yeah, it's fingers crossed.
Fun little fact. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you, but when we did the episode on Witches of Eastwick with the Picture This Boys, I remember specifically that was an episode where the pain was really flaring up during the recording. And I don't know if it came across at all or if I ever mentioned it, but I specifically remember that episode was one where I was in pain a little bit.
And, I don't know fully what your process is of terms of like recovery or having to deal with that, but like how much of it, like, did you personally keep up or follow through because either you did find it effective or it's just a pain in the ass to do said things like, oh.
There are a couple, but then and you know this, there are some things that I have kept to. Like, Ryan, do I sit on couches anymore?
No, you don't.
No.
But yeah, I was just curious because, I was watching this and I was thinking about you watching this. That happens on the pod sometimes with some movies. And I was thinking about like, in the time that I've known you, you've had to deal with like this whole process of like, it's a long thing of like getting diagnosed and then like, what's this, what's that? You have to do this thing and you have to do that thing. And then, oh, this thing worked. Oh, this thing didn't work. And
you have to make Soviet Western.
You have to do this. And, even, saying this too, you've admitted this on the podcast. When after things were said and done, you reflect back, you were like, oh my God, it was really that bad, wasn't it? Like,
oh, yeah.
Your posture, or even
after I was cured and watching Soviet West, I'm like, oh my God, I am so diagonal.
Even the second time when you had back flare up again, there was like a good 8-9 months where the symptoms of it coming back were very obvious to everyone else around you, and you were like, hey, this is happening again. And you're like, nah, it's probably fine. And then it was, and then it happened again. And after you had your next surgery, you're like, yeah, it was kind of obvious, wasn't it? It was kind of coming back. And it was like, this movie kind of captures even on a less small scale, but this movie kind of captures like that weird dynamic of like Margot Martindale has that as the mother with her other kid, where it's like things are happening, but we're going to kind of just hope that things aren't. And then it kind of gets to that point where it's like, oh, that was actually one of the most upsetting moments of the movie, where she's like, he saw it happen to the other brother, so he actually knows fully what's in store for him.
Oh,
and what a
go
nightmare.
Down the stairs, yeah.
Yeah, what a fucking night. Yeah, but like, and he also had the previous sibling that died from this too, because she had the previous kid who had it and died, and then she has the next one who's now getting it again. It was just like that level of like, this movie really captures like that sense of like, things are fine, right? And it's like, maybe not fine. It's like, yeah, but I want them to be fine, because if it's not nice to think about.
Yeah, I'm a bit too young to remember all of the details, but when I was 10, 11, my mum's uncle, so my great uncle, he had brain cancer and passed away from that. And I remember mostly hearing the family talk about it, but like he basically had lost his personality. He couldn't talk. He couldn't do anything really. And yeah, hearing that from my family, it's kind of what put the idea in my head of like, oh, that's a thing that can happen to people. And then I think back on a few years ago, I watched the Louis Theroux documentary on like brain damage and how that one was about people who didn't lose their personality, but they changed and their families admitted like, this is a different person.
Yeah, what's his name again? There's like the famous example of that guy, like, I can't remember from what era he was, like the turn of the century or whatever, that got like the railroad spike through the brain or whatever, and he lived.
There was someone like that,
but he was never the same person afterwards. Like, that was one of those like revolutionary things of like brain surgeries and whatnot.
Yeah, and we have a friend who, I won't say his name, but yeah, we have a friend who his older brother had brain damage as a child, and for a long time I thought it was like, physical? No, what's the political correct term for retardation these days? I forget.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it was something like that. Then later on, he told me like, oh no, that's brain damage.
Mm-hmm.
And just seeing that, it's like, oh my God, this was a person who, was not like this when they were born, and it's just a thing that happened to them.
And there's that thing about this movie where they wonder all of these things. Like the brain is shut off in these ways, but they know for a fact, like the part of him that you would consider that makes you a person, that makes you, one that has like thoughts and dreams and ambitions and desires, all of these things is still active. It's just locked. And he can't express that. And so there's all these moments in the movie where they're trying to convince Susan Sarandon that her son doesn't feel and doesn't emote and is gone. The lights are off. But as we see at the end of the movie, that wasn't true. Like he is still in there. He can still communicate. He can still understand. He doesn't need the children's books anymore because he's no longer like a 7-year-old boy. He's now turning into like a preteen. And so he wants the bigger books. And like that was a nice, effective moment too, where, at the end of the movie, they tell you like he's learning how to communicate with computers and stuff like that. And it makes you think about, even something as someone as well known as like Stephen Hawking, right?
I was literally thinking, theory of everything.
Stephen Hawking just as a person in general, where it's just like that was a guy who, existed with this, disability that many people would assume would dehumanize you, rob you of your personhood, and yet he was one of the, the great minds, and weirdly enough, great speakers.
And also,
yet he had this thing that, many would assume he wouldn't live long past and would be robbed of all of his, identity. And
you took
mind.
You took it out of my mouth. Yeah, he was also someone who very much outlived like the time span he was given. That was ALS.
Yes, yeah, there you go. But that is Lorenzo's Oil. Interesting movie. It's I got to think about it too. George Miller never has done anything like this again in his career. Like he never, like, was Babe Pig in the City after this? Like, where was that in relation to this? Like, I just can't remember in terms of his filmography what he did right after this, because
I think that was like mid-90s.
Yeah, and
right?
this is 92,
Late 90s?
so this would be.
When was the first Babe?
I thought that was the early 90s. So George Miller, he's capable of this stuff, and you do see those flourishes. Like, there's a lot of interesting Dutch angles. There's a lot of haunting,
the shot where he's on the Christmas tree, where you get that Dutch angle of the chair. Like, just that alone really disturbed me.
Yeah. So he went mad. So he did. This is how his filmography went. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He did, just to cut to the 80s to the 90s. Twilight Zone the movie. He did a segment on that.
Okay.
Beyond Thunderdome, Mad Max, The Witches of Eastwick, Lorenzo's Oil, Babe Pig in the City, Happy Feet 2. Like, he went to Children's Land after Lorenzo's Oil, and then he came back with Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah, it was a long gap, wasn't it?
And then in between that and the new Mad Max, he did 3,000 Years of Longing, which I haven't seen, but people are really divided on. But that's supposed to be like that's like really him going, fuck. Him saying, fuck this prancing and dancing around of the fantasy. I'm going to go full fantasy. Because that is something too, like, even though we say he does the fantastical, it's almost like a little dance and flirtation with it.
Like magical realism?
Yeah, like Mad Max is not fantasy, but it may as well be. Like, there's a fairy tale type of folklorian type stuff with the Mad Max movies, but like they're not actual fantasy movies, but they are in a weird way. And then, with the kids movies, it's like, well, those are kids movies, pigs talking, like, yeah, I guess that's that's fantastic, but they're not like, traditional fantasy. But then 3,000 Years of Longing or whatever is like, now that's him being like, now there's a genie. It's Idris Elba, and it's just a bunch of crazy nonsense. But that's Lorenzo's Oil. Bartek, it is your time to recommend a movie for the podcast. And is this your international pick, or is this your Hollywood? It is your international pick.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'm recommending is Lorenzo's Oil. It's a good film, but it is very heavy. So if you know generally what it's about, and you know that this involves a lot of people suffering through a very serious thing, discretion is advised about whether you should check it out or not.
Here's,
but it is
here's
good.
how we determine if you should check it out. Do you think your mum would like it?
I think she'd appreciate this.
Okay.
She liked The Nightingale, but obviously, you know, the same way that we kind of liked
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. All right.
Yes. So when I recommended my last film, that was The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, I was tossing up 2 different films. Like, should I do this one? Should I do that one? I picked that film and saved this one for this recommendation. We are going back to an actor that we've seen in a film that I've recommended before.
Neat.
Yep. And this time we are going to be doing a 1971 film.
Okay.
Yep. And this one is from Hong Kong.
Oh, okay.
We are going to be doing the first film that Bruce Lee starred in as a leading role. It is The Big Boss,
The Big Boss. Okay.
which America called Fists of Fury, and then Fists of Fury was actually made, and they're like, whoops.
Okay. You know, it's so silly. I don't know why I thought this when you said it's going to be an actor we've done before. And I'm like, okay. You know what actor I thought of? And then you said the year, I'm like, well, it's not going to be him. For some reason, I thought you were going to give us a Mads Mikkelsen movie. Because we've been talking about Mads just in general off mic. We've also been talking about The Hunt a lot on mic in the last couple of episodes every now and
We
then.
did mention it once.
Yeah,
didn't we?
we've mentioned it a couple of times recently, and it was like, but no, Bruce Lee and Mads Mikkelsen are very different guys. Who would win in a fight? Don't underestimate Mads. He's very fit.
Don't underestimate.
Don't blah 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 blah. Bruce Lee. I agree. Bartek's hanging his head in shame, which is a rarity.
I had a really funny joke about like, oh, don't underestimate Bruce Lee. He's actually really fucking strong.
Yeah, he is. He was a guy that was very strong.
It's a martial arts film, so it comes with the territory. But technically, this film also has some sad stuff.
No, there you are. But everyone, thank you so much for tuning in and listening. You can find us on social medias of Facebook and Twitter, Spit and Polish Presents. You can email us at...
The email is spitandpolished@gmail.com.
Feel free to let us know what you thought about what we've talked here today or on other episodes, as well as recommend films for us to cover on the podcast. We'd love some recommendations. We'll add them to our list. This is the year in which we're trying to cover some older films. So if you also have any recommendations for older movies, please give them to us. We will be happy to talk about those. But as always, a pleasure to be here talking to you, Bartek, about a movie, even if the movie's really sad. I find sometimes I keep thinking about, and I won't raise their name, but we had a guest on one time who said like, I've mentioned this as a phrase that haunts me a lot, where they're like, I don't like watching movies that make me sad. I only like watching movies that make me happy. And I'm like, I can't live like that. I need to have diversity and range in my movies. But I find like movies like this, where it's like, what is the difference between a movie that is just sad for the sake of being sad? Like, you know, I've read some of the reviews for this where people are just like, oh, this movie is just about a child suffering. And it's like, what to you makes a movie not tragedy porn in a weird way? Because I didn't find this to be tragedy porn, because I think it raised a lot of ethical and moral quandaries rather than, to me, I know this has a lot of sad stuff and I say it's very heavy, but I didn't feel like it was just about the emotional, fraught nature of it. I thought it really leaned into many other aspects that come with this, obviously, emotionally devastating subject. But like, what is it about a movie that like toes the line of it being not just like emotional porn?
I can see how this could be manipulated too for the emotional porn aspect, but this film genuinely does have hope. And, you know, looking towards a brighter future, like, you know, the characters all want the future sufferers to not suffer as much. And, you know, it's the here and now of this film where, you know, that happens. And the most suffering in this film is like any scene where like Lorenzo is like really acting up and screaming. Like I could see that being like super upsetting, especially for maybe a parent of someone who's similarly suffering. But yeah, this film, it doesn't forget the human side of it. Even when you have all of this talk about, like, you know, the scientists and the doctors, they've got their own agenda. They're the serious ones. You have the scene where, you know, the main scientist guy is like, you know, I have to remain objective so that I can do my job, but don't let that think that, you know, I'm completely heartless. And they even have like a little moment where like he breaks eye contact. Like you could have even inserted like a teardrop there, but even without it, like it showed.
And then you have the off the record, I wouldn't give him that much, like in grams, because that would really screw with the liver.
Yeah.
Like, I keep thinking of, there is this subculture of movies, like these, they're kind of like these, like deathbed dramas, I would call them, where like the premise is like My Sister's Keeper, for instance, is a movie that comes to mind, or The Fault in Our Stars, where it's like movies about these young people who are dying from a terminal illness, and it's like the whole movie is about that, and it's like this melodramatic situations about like what it is to be alive, and there's like a whole subculture of these movies, and I don't feel like this one is in the same ballpark as those, because weirdly enough, unlike some of those movies, this one is so much about like the medical side of it that it actually kind of veers away from what those ones are more about, which is more about the emotional side. Like, oh, you know, I know my wife's a big fan of The Fault in Our Stars, so she may have difference of opinions, but like one of the things that people criticize about that movie and that book is kind of like it takes this subject of like people dying, these young teenagers dying, and it's like this kind of vehicle for the writer themselves to just kind of muse on things pretentiously. That's one where it's like famously one of the things that's mocked is the guy always has a cigarette in his mouth, but it's never lit. And he has like this edgelord quote about like how it reminds him about like how he could, like, you know, he could take this and die.
So
blah, 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 blah.
it's about the wisdom of the suffering.
Yes. Well, this movie, I don't really think it's going for that at all. I think it's going for so many other things that come about from this process itself.
It feels very human, this film.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is our discussion. Until next time, remember to be kind to each other, or George Miller will come back and make a fucking depressing medical drama movie, and you will watch it because we all love him and we want to support him as he's entering his twilight years. And I genuinely want to know, do you think he will make a non-Mad Max movie before he goes? Because he's in his 70s, and people are shocked that he's still making Mad Max movies. But I was like,
did he make the last one?
Yeah, he did Furiosa. Yeah. Do you think he'll come back with like a non-children's movie that isn't a Mad Max movie? I kind of doubt it. I think although he did 3,000 Years of Longing, so I guess he's got it in him, I guess.
Is that for children?
No. I actually don't know who it's for. That's actually... I
don't know much about it. I think maybe I've heard that. I don't even know.
Yeah, Tilda Swinton and Idris Elba in a hotel room, and he's like a genie or something bizarre. Our friend Mark watched it, and he didn't know what to make of it.
Oh, poor Mark.
Poor Mark.
Do you think people will like the bit of me forgetting the word autism?
Yes. Oh, is that what you were trying to get? Oh, I didn't even realize that's what you were trying to say. I didn't even, when you said the retardation word, I didn't even think that you were relating it to autism. I thought you were just trying to say mentally handicapped or something.
Basically, yeah.
Oh, Bartek. In the course of this 10 years of the podcast, we've got on record you saying much, much worse.
I'll do a callback. I had the eggs on my face during that moment.
Now I just repost the image that I made of you with an egg photoshopped on your face.
Yes.